I suppose I should start by introducing myself. My name is James Connor. I served as a sergeant in the United States Army, 2nd Infantry Division, during the Korean War. What I'm about to tell you isn't easy for me. I've spent over 70 years trying to make sense of it, and I'm still not sure I have. But I know what I experienced was real. As real as the chair I'm sitting in right now. As real as the memories that still wake me up in the middle of the night. It was November 1950. The weather had turned bitter cold in Korea. The kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. We'd been pushing north toward the Yalu River, following MacArthur's orders, confident the war would be over by Christmas. That's what they told us anyway. You'll be home for Christmas, boys. Turns out they couldn't have been more wrong. I was 21 years old then. Just a kid from Akron, Ohio, who'd never been further than Cincinnati before the Army got me. I'd been in Korea for about 4 months by that point, long enough to lose the wide-eyed innocence I'd arrived with, but not so long that I'd become completely hardened. Not yet, anyway. My closest buddy was a guy named Tommy Fitzgerald. We'd met during basic training at Fort Benning and ended up in the same unit by some stroke of luck or divine intervention. I'm still not sure which. Tommy was from Boston, had the accent and everything. Smart as a whip, always had his nose in some book during downtime. He wasn't supposed to be there, really. Had a college deferment, but gave it up after his older brother died at Incheon. Said he couldn't sit in a classroom while others were fighting. Hey, Connor, he used to say to me, that Boston accent thick as molasses. When we get home, you're coming to visit. My mom makes the best clam chowder you'll ever taste. I always told him I'd never eaten clam chowder before. Perfect. He'd say, then you won't have anything to compare it to. You'll think all clam chowder is supposed to taste that good. I miss those conversations. The easy ones, you know? The ones about home and food and family. The ones that kept us human when everything around us was trying to turn us into something else. Our platoon had been assigned to a hillside position near the Shosen Reservoir. Beautiful country, if you could look past the war. Mountains that seemed to touch the sky. Pine trees dusted with early snow. Peaceful almost. But we knew the Chinese were out there watching, waiting. Intelligence had been reporting Chinese troop movements across the Yalu for weeks. But MacArthur dismissed it. Said they wouldn't dare intervene. He was wrong about that too. The night before it happened, before everything changed, Tommy and I were on watch together. The temperature had dropped well below zero, and the wind cut through our field jackets like they were made of paper. We huddled in our foxhole, sharing cigarettes and what was left of a chocolate bar my mother had sent in her last care package. You ever think about what you're going to do when you get home, Connor? Tommy asked me, his breath visible in the moonlight. Try to forget all this, I said. Tommy shook his head. You won't forget. None of us will, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. How do you figure? He took a long drag of his cigarette, the ember glowing bright in the darkness. My grandpa fought in the Great War. France, 1918. He told me once that the things he saw over there, the men he lost, they became a part of him. Said carrying their memory was a kind of responsibility. I remember scoffing at that. Sounds like a heavy load to bear. Maybe, Tommy said, but what's the alternative? Pretending none of this happened? Pretending we didn't know the guys who didn't make it? I didn't have an answer for him then. I wish I had. It was the last real conversation we ever had. Morning came clear and cold. The kind of brightness that's almost painful after a long night. We got word from command that patrols had spotted Chinese forces moving into position around us. Our orders were to hold the hillside at all costs. Reinforcements would be coming, they said. Just hold the line. Around noon, we started hearing artillery in the distance. Getting closer. The lieutenant gathered us together for a briefing. His face was grim, his eyes tired. He'd been in World War II, seen action at Normandy and the Bulge. Not much rattled him, but something about his expression that day sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the Korean winter. Listen up, he said, his voice low. We've got reports of a Chinese division moving in from the north. They've cut off the road behind us, which means we're on our own for now. Our job is to hold this position until relieved. Someone asked when reinforcements would arrive. The lieutenant's pause told us everything we needed to know before he even spoke. They're coming, he said simply. Until then, dig in deeper, check your ammo, and prepare for company. I looked over at Tommy. He met my eyes and gave me a slight nod. We'd been in tight spots before, but something felt different this time. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense of foreboding that I couldn't shake. We spent the afternoon reinforcing our positions, distributing ammunition, and trying not to think too much about what was coming. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground, an eerie silence fell over the hillside. Not the normal quiet of the countryside, but the tense, expectant hush that precedes violence. I remember checking my watch. It was just after 5:30 p.m. when the first mortar rounds hit. The explosions lit up the darkening sky, sending dirt and snow and shrapnel in all directions. We ducked into our foxholes, pressed ourselves into the frozen earth as the barrage continued. It seemed to go on forever, though it was probably no more than 15 or 20 minutes. When the mortars finally stopped, we knew what was coming next. Sure enough, the silence was broken by whistles and shouts in Chinese. Then came the wave of soldiers, hundreds of them, emerging from the tree line at the base of the hill, charging upward toward our positions. The lieutenant's voice cut through the chaos. "Open fire! Make every shot count!" We did. The hillside erupted with the sound of rifle fire and machine guns. The first wave of Chinese soldiers fell, but more kept coming. They moved in a way I'd never seen before. Coordinated, determined, seemingly indifferent to their losses. Tommy was in the foxhole next to mine, operating one of our 30 caliber machine guns. I could hear him shouting over the din of battle, though I couldn't make out the words. His gun blazed steadily, cutting down rows of advancing soldiers. But for every one that fell, 2 more seemed to take his place. The first assault was repelled barely. We had casualties, 3 dead, several wounded. The Chinese pulled back to regroup, and we used the brief respite to redistribute ammunition and tend to the wounded as best we could. I crawled over to Tommy's position. "You okay?" I asked him. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat despite the cold. He nodded. "Didn't think there'd be so many of them. The lieutenant says they'll probably hit us again before dawn." Tommy checked his ammunition. "We don't have enough ammo to hold them off if they come in those numbers again." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. We both knew the situation was dire. "Hey, Connor," Tommy said after a moment. "If I don't make it through this, don't talk like that." I cut him off. "We're both getting out of here." He gave me a look I'll never forget. A mix of resignation and determination. "Yeah, sure. But just in case, there's a letter in my pocket. For my mom. Make sure she gets it, would you? You can deliver it yourself when we get home." I told him, but I found myself memorizing the location of his letter anyway. I crawled back to my position, trying to ignore the knot of dread in my stomach. The night wore on, cold and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. It was beautiful in a way that seemed almost offensive given our circumstances. The second attack came just before midnight. This time they hit us from multiple directions. The hillside became a chaos of gunfire, explosions, and desperate hand-to-hand fighting. I fired until my M1 was empty, then used it as a club when Chinese soldiers reached our line. The world narrowed to a series of desperate moments. Aim, fire, reload, repeat. No time to think, only react. At some point, I heard a scream from Tommy's position. I turned to see his foxhole swarming with Chinese soldiers. Without thinking, I grabbed a grenade, pulled the pin, and threw it. The explosion cleared the area, and I rushed over, pistol drawn. Tommy was lying at the bottom of the foxhole, blood darkening the front of his jacket. "Medic!" I screamed, dropping down beside him. "I need a medic over here." Tommy's eyes found mine, unfocused at first, then clearing slightly. "Did da renew him? Did they break through?" "No." I lied. "We pushed them back. You just hang on, okay? Medic's coming." He tried to speak again, but coughed instead, blood speckling his lips. I knew then that no medic could help him. The wound was too severe, and we were too isolated. "The letter," he managed to say. "Don't forget." "I won't." I promised, my voice breaking. "I won't forget." He died there, in that frozen foxhole in Korea, with me holding his hand. My best friend. Gone just like that. I didn't have time to process it, to grieve. The battle was still raging around us. I took his letter, closed his eyes, and rejoined the fight. The rest of that night blurs together in my memory. Moments of intense clarity amid a chaos of noise and violence. I remember the lieutenant falling, a bullet through his chest. I remember the radio operator desperately trying to call for support, his voice rising in panic when there was no response. I remember the cold, the unrelenting cold that seemed to seep into every fiber of my being. By dawn, our position was overrun. Those of us still alive were scattered, fighting in small pockets of resistance. I found myself alongside 3 other soldiers from my platoon. Wilson, a farm kid from Nebraska, Diaz, a quiet guy from New Mexico, and Jenkins, a replacement who'd only joined us a week earlier. We were pinned down behind what remained of our supply tent, surrounded and running low on ammunition. "What do we do now, Sarge?" Jenkins asked, his young face pale with fear. I checked my weapon. 2 rounds left in my pistol, no more grenades. "We make a break for it," I said. "Head south toward the reservoir. Try to link up with any American forces still holding the line." It was a desperate plan, but it was all I had. We waited for what seemed like an opening, a slight reduction in the firing directed at our position, then ran. We made it perhaps 30 yards before the world erupted around us. A mortar round, I think. I remember a flash of light, a deafening bang, and then the sensation of flying through the air. I landed hard, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. I couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched ringing in my ears. My vision swam, blurring and darkening at the edges. I tried to move, to get up, but my body wouldn't respond. It was only then that I felt the pain, a burning, tearing sensation in my chest and abdomen. I looked down and saw red, so much red spreading across the white snow beneath me. Oddly, I wasn't afraid. There was a kind of detachment, as if I was observing someone else's body, someone else's blood. My thoughts turned to Tommy, to the letter in my pocket that I'd promised to deliver, to my parents back in Akron who would receive a telegram. "We regret to inform you." To all the things I'd never get to do, the life I'd never get to live. The sky above me was lightening, the darkness giving way to dawn. Beautiful, I thought. At least I get to see one more sunrise. The pain began to fade, replaced by a spreading numbness. Cold, but not the biting cold of the Korean winter. A different kind of cold. Deeper. More profound. My eyelids grew heavy, and I found myself struggling to keep them open. "Just rest," a voice inside me seemed to say. "Just close your eyes and rest now." So I did. What happened next is difficult to explain. I've spent decades trying to find the right words, and I'm still not sure they exist. How do you describe something that exists beyond the limits of ordinary experience? How do you convey in human language what might not be meant for human understanding? The transition wasn't immediate. There was a moment of nothing, complete absence, a void. Then gradually a growing awareness. Not of light exactly, but of presence. As if I'd been asleep in a dark room and suddenly sensed I wasn't alone. I felt myself moving, or being moved, though I had no physical sensation of a body. The darkness began to recede, not like a light being turned on, but more like my awareness expanding to perceive what had been there all along. And there was a sound, not quite music, but something like it. A vibration that I felt rather than heard, that somehow communicated meaning without words. Then I saw the light. People who've never had this experience often roll their eyes at this part, but there's a reason it's so common in these stories, because that's what there is. Light. Not just brightness, but light that seems to have substance, intelligence, purpose. Light that feels more real than anything I'd ever experienced in what we call reality. I was drawn toward it, not against my will, but because every part of me wanted to go there. There was a sense of homecoming, of rightness, of finally arriving where I was always meant to be. The closer I got, the more I could perceive within the light. Shapes, movements, what seemed like countless presences. And then I saw him, Tommy, standing there at what I can only describe as a threshold. He looked exactly as I remembered him, but also somehow more vibrant, more real, more himself than he'd ever been in life. He was smiling. "Took you long enough," he said, his voice clearer than any earthly sound. I tried to speak, but realized I didn't know how in this place. Yet somehow he understood me anyway. "Yeah, I know it's confusing at first," he said. "You get used to it." I wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. Was this heaven? Were we dead? What was this place? But before I could formulate any of these thoughts into something coherent, Tommy's expression changed, becoming more serious. "Listen, Connor, there's something you need to know. Something I need to show you." He reached out what I perceived as his hand, though I couldn't tell you now whether it was a physical hand or just the idea of one. I took it, or thought I did. The moment we connected, the world, or whatever this place was, shifted again. We were suddenly surrounded by what I can only describe as scenes from a life. My life. But not just the past, the future too. I saw myself returning home from Korea. I saw a woman who would become my wife, children who would become my legacy. I saw joys and sorrows, triumphs and failures. But throughout it all, I saw a thread of purpose that I had never recognized before. "You see it, don't you?" Tommy asked. "The connections, the pattern." I did see it, though I couldn't have explained it. Every life I touched, every action I took, rippled outward in ways I could never have imagined. Nothing was wasted, nothing without meaning. That's why you have to go back. Tommy said. The idea was incomprehensible to me. Go back? How could anyone leave this place of perfect understanding, of complete belonging, to return to the limited, painful world I just left? I don't want to go back. I tried to communicate. Tommy's smile was gentle but firm. It's not about what you want, Connor. It's about what needs to be done. Your time isn't finished yet. I felt a resistance building in me. This place, whatever, wherever it was, felt right in a way nothing in my life ever had. The thought of leaving it was unbearable. I know, Tommy said, responding to my unspoken feelings. I felt the same way, but I understood when they showed me. Showed you what? Instead of answering, Tommy gestured, and the scenes around us changed. Now I saw darker possibilities, versions of the future where I wasn't present. I saw my family broken by grief. I saw moments where I would have made a difference, small and large, that never happened. I saw a particular life, a granddaughter not yet born, who would never exist without me. There's something else you need to see, Tommy said, and the scene changed again. Now we were watching what appeared to be myself, much older, sitting with a young man in military uniform. I recognized the uniform, Marine Corps. The young man was weeping, his head in his hands. My older self had a hand on his shoulder, speaking words I couldn't hear. Who is he? I asked. Your grandson, Tommy said. He'll come back from a war with wounds you can't see. No one will understand what he's going through, except you. I watched as my older self continued to talk to the young Marine, who gradually raised his head, his expression shifting from despair to something like hope. You'll save his life that day, Tommy said simply, but only if you go back. The weight of what he was showing me settled over my consciousness. It wasn't just about me or even my immediate family. It was about a chain of events, of lives interconnected across time that depended on my return. There's a message you need to carry back, Tommy continued, not just for your grandson, but for anyone who will listen. About what really matters. About what waits for all of us. What is it? I asked. What's the message? Tommy smiled again, but there was something different in it now, a depth of wisdom I'd never seen in him during life. That's the thing, Connor. I can't just tell you. You have to experience it for yourself. You have to carry it in your heart until the time comes to share it. As he spoke, I became aware of a change in our surroundings. The light was receding, or rather, I was moving away from it. Tommy's figure began to fade. Wait, I called out, suddenly desperate. I don't understand. How will I know what to say? His voice came to me clearly, even as his image grew dimmer. Yeah, you'll know. When the time comes, you'll know. I tried to move toward him, to return to the light, but the pull in the opposite direction was too strong. It was like being caught in a current, drawn inexorably away from shore. The last thing I heard before everything faded was Tommy's voice, distant now but still distinct. Remember the letter, Connor. Don't forget your promise. Then there was darkness again. Not the expansive, peaceful void of before, but a constricting, suffocating blackness. And pain, returning in waves that grew more intense with each pulse. I felt cold again, the bitter Korean cold seeping into my bones. And I heard voices, human voices, speaking English. This one's still alive. I need a medic over here now. Hands on my body lifting me, the jolt of movement sending fresh agony through me. I wanted to scream, but couldn't find my voice. I wanted to open my eyes, but they felt sealed shut. Hang on, soldier. Someone was saying, we're getting you out of here. Just hang on. I tried to speak, to tell them about Tommy, about what I'd seen, but no sound would come. The darkness was closing in again, but different this time. Not the darkness of death, but of unconsciousness. The last thing I remember thinking before it claimed me was a simple question. Why? Why send me back to this? I didn't know then that it would take me the rest of my life to find the answer. I woke up 2 weeks later in a MASH unit near Busan. The doctors told me I'd been hit by shrapnel from a mortar round. One piece had punctured my lung, another had torn through my intestines. I'd lost so much blood they declared me dead in the field before someone noticed I still had a faint pulse. It's a miracle you're alive, Sergeant, the doctor told me. By all rights, you should be dead. I am dead, I wanted to tell him. I died on that hillside. What's left is something else, someone else. But I didn't have the words then, or the strength to speak them if I had. Recovery was slow and painful. 3 surgeries to repair the damage. Months of rehabilitation. It was spring before I was stable enough to be transported back to the States. By then, the war had settled into a grinding stalemate around the 38th parallel. Many of the men I'd served with were long gone, either rotated home or buried in graves I would never visit. During those months of recovery, I thought constantly about what I'd experienced, about Tommy and the light and the message I was supposed to bring back. But the more time passed, the more distant it felt, like a dream that fades upon waking. The details blurred, the certainty wavered. Had it really happened? Or was it just the hallucination of a dying brain, starved of oxygen and desperate for comfort? There were moments when I was absolutely certain it had been real. More real than the hospital bed I lay in. More real than the pain that still racked my body. And then there were moments of crushing doubt when I questioned everything, including my own sanity. The one thing I never doubted was my promise to Tommy. His letter was still in my pocket when they found me, somehow preserved despite everything. As soon as I was able, I wrote to his mother. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about my experience. Not then. I simply said that Tommy had entrusted me with the letter, that he had been brave until the end, and that he had spoken of her often and with great love. She wrote back a month later, a kind letter thanking me for my service and for delivering her son's final words. She invited me to visit when I returned to the States, to meet the family Tommy had spoken of so frequently. You were his brother in all but blood, she wrote. That makes you family to us as well. I promised myself I would go, though it would be years before I finally made that journey. When I was finally sent home to Akron in the summer of 1951, I was a changed man, and not just because of my wounds. I moved through the world differently now. Everything seemed simultaneously more precious and less important. The concerns that occupied most people, money, status, possessions, felt trivial to me now. What mattered were the connections, the moments of genuine human contact, the opportunities to ease another's suffering. My parents noticed the change, though they attributed it to the trauma of war. You just need time, my mother would say, patting my hand across the dinner table. You'll feel like yourself again soon. But I didn't want to feel like my old self. That person had died in Korea. What I wanted was to understand what had happened to me, to make sense of it, to find the words for the message I was supposed to carry. I started reading philosophy, theology, accounts of other near-death experiences. I sought out others who claimed to have glimpsed what lies beyond death. Some were charlatans, using vague spiritual claims to extract money from the desperate and grieving. But others had the look in their eyes that I saw in my own mirror. They knew. They had seen. Life went on around me. I got a job at my father's hardware store. I went on dates, though most women seemed put off by my distant manner, my preoccupation with questions they found bizarre or frightening. Why can't you talk about normal things? One exasperated young woman asked me after I'd spent an entire dinner discussing the nature of consciousness and what might survive bodily death. I couldn't explain to her that normal things no longer existed for me. Every moment, every interaction, every choice was illuminated by what I'd experienced. I was living in two worlds simultaneously, the material world of work and family and daily routines, and the larger reality I had glimpsed beyond death's threshold. In the fall of 1952, almost 2 years after my experience, I finally made good on my promise to visit Tommy's family in Boston. His mother greeted me at the door of their modest home in South Boston, a small woman with Tommy's eyes and smile. James, she said, embracing me as if I were her own son. I'm so glad you've come. The visit was both painful and healing. I met Tommy's father, his 2 sisters, his younger brother who looked so much like him it made my heart ache. We shared memories of Tommy, they telling stories from his childhood, me recounting edited versions of our time together in Korea. I didn't tell them about holding his hand as he died. Some burdens you don't share with a grieving family. After dinner, Mrs. Fitzgerald took me aside. There's something I've been wanting to ask you, she said, her voice low. Something about Tommy's last letter. My heart raced. Of course. She led me to a small study where Mr. Fitzgerald did the accounts for his plumbing business. From a drawer, she withdrew a familiar envelope, the one I had carried from Korea. In this letter, she said, Tommy wrote something very strange. He wrote it the night before he died. I nodded, though I had no idea what the letter contained. He wrote that he'd had a dream that he was going to die the next day, but that you would survive. He said in the dream, he was told to wait for you on the other side because you would need guidance to find your way back. Her eyes searched mine. What did he mean by that, James? The room seemed to tilt around me. How could Tommy have written that? How could he have known? I'm not sure, I stammered. Mrs. Fitzgerald's gaze was steady. I think you do know. I think something happened over there. something you haven't told anyone. In that moment, looking into the eyes so like her son's, I made a decision. I told her everything. About the battle, about Tommy's death, about my own. About seeing her son in that place of light. About the message he'd helped me bring back. Though I still couldn't articulate exactly what that message was. I expected disbelief, perhaps even anger. Instead, she listened with perfect calm, as if I were telling her about a trip to the grocery store. When I finished, she took my hands in hers. "I believe you," she said simply. "You do?" She nodded. The night before we received the telegram about Tommy, I dreamed of him. He was standing in a beautiful light, and he told me he was all right, that he was home now. He said you would come to me with his letter, and that I should listen to what you had to say. Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. He said to tell you when you came that it wasn't a dream. I felt something unlock inside me then. A certainty I had been searching for since waking in that MASH unit. It was real. All of it was real, and I wasn't alone in knowing it. That visit changed something fundamental for me. The doubt that had plagued me began to recede. I started to find the words for what I had experienced, for the message I was meant to carry. Not all at once, but gradually, like a photograph slowly developing. Life continued to unfold. In 1953, I met Sarah, a nurse at the VA hospital where I still went for checkups. Unlike the other women I dated, she didn't find my preoccupations strange or frightening. "I've sat with too many dying patients," she told me. "I've seen too many people in their final moments, at peace with something I couldn't see. I've always wondered what they were experiencing." We were married in 1954, and our first child, a daughter we named Elizabeth, was born the following year. A son, Michael, followed in 1957. Becoming a father gave me a new perspective on the vision Tommy had shown me, of lives interconnected across time. I looked at my children and wondered what role they would play in the pattern, what lives they would touch, what differences they would make. Through it all, I continued to seek understanding of what had happened to me, continued to refine the message I felt compelled to share. I started speaking to small groups, church gatherings, community organizations, veterans groups. I didn't frame it as a religious experience, though many chose to interpret it that way. I simply told my story as honestly and completely as I could and shared what I had come to understand from it. Some dismissed me as deluded or attention-seeking. Others embraced what I said because it confirmed their existing beliefs. But there were always a few, sometimes just one person in the audience, who listened with recognition in their eyes. People who had glimpsed beyond the veil themselves, or who were open to the possibility that our understanding of reality is far more limited than we like to believe. It wasn't until 1968, as America found itself mired in another war in Asia, that I finally found the full form of the message. My son Michael was 11, watching the news from Vietnam with increasingly troubled eyes. One evening he asked me, "Dad, is it all just for nothing? All those people dying?" And suddenly I knew what Tommy had been trying to help me understand. I knew what I was meant to bring back. "No," I told my son, pulling him close. "It's not for nothing. Every life has meaning. Every choice matters. Every act of love or courage or kindness reverberates through time in ways we can't possibly comprehend. And death. Death isn't the end. It's a doorway. What waits on the other side is more beautiful, more real, more meaningful than anything we experience here." "How do you know?" Michael asked. "Because I've seen it," I said. And I told him my story, the full story, for the first time. As I spoke, I felt a presence in the room with us. Not Tommy this time, but something larger, something that encompassed him and me and all of existence. The same presence I had sensed in that place of light. And I understood then that the message wasn't just about the continuity of consciousness beyond death, though that was part of it. It was about the profound interconnection of all things, the inherent meaning in every life, the reality of love as the fundamental force in the universe. That night, after Michael had gone to bed, I sat down and began to write. Not just my story, but the understanding that had grown from it over nearly 2 decades. The words flowed as if from some source beyond myself, filling page after page until dawn found me still writing, exhausted but exhilarated. When I finally stopped, I had over 100 pages, the beginning of what would eventually become a book. But more importantly, I had clarity. I knew now why I had been sent back. Not just for my family, not just for the grandson Tommy had shown me, who would not be born for many years yet, but for anyone who might be helped by what I had learned. The message in its simplest form was this: We are more than our physical bodies. Our consciousness, our essential self, continues beyond death. All lives are interconnected in ways we can barely comprehend. Love is the fundamental reality of the universe. And knowing these things, truly knowing them, not just believing them, changes how we live, how we treat one another, how we face our challenges and our mortality. As the sun rose over Akron that morning in 1968, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known since before Korea. I had kept my promise to Tommy. I had found the words for the message. Now I just had to live it, to embody it, to share it with whoever was ready to hear. Little did I know then how many would be ready or how far the ripples would spread. The years that followed brought both fulfillment and challenges. My book, initially self-published under the title Beyond the Threshold, What I Learned When I Died in Korea, found a small but dedicated audience. Veterans especially seemed to connect with it. Men who had seen combat, who had watched friends die, who carried wounds visible and invisible. They would approach me after readings or send letters filled with their own stories. I've never told anyone this before. They would often begin before sharing experiences that echoed my own. Moments of clarity as life ebbed away, encounters with deceased comrades, glimpses of something beyond our ordinary understanding. Sarah supported my work completely, even when it meant financial sacrifice or social awkwardness. "You were given this for a reason," she would say. "Who are we to question it?" Our children grew up with my story as part of their family narrative. Elizabeth, our daughter, approached it with a scientist's mind, always questioning, probing for inconsistencies. "How do you know it wasn't just your brain creating comforting hallucinations?" she would ask. "I don't know for certain," I would answer honestly. "I can only tell you what I experienced, and that it felt more real than anything before or since." Michael, on the other hand, accepted it without question. "It makes sense, Dad," he said once. "Why would all this," he gestured around us, at the world, "be all there is?" As the Vietnam War escalated, Michael's interest in my experience took on a more urgent quality. He was approaching draft age, and the possibility of following in my footsteps, of facing combat, of perhaps dying in another Asian country, hung over our family like a shadow. In 1974, when the draft lottery was held, Michael drew a high number, 313. He wouldn't be called up. The relief in our household was palpable, though mixed with guilt when we thought of other families whose sons weren't so fortunate. "Does it make me a coward?" Michael asked me the night after the lottery. "To be glad I don't have to go?" "No," I told him. "It makes you human. No one wants to face what I faced. No one should have to. But you came back with something," he said. "Something important." I nodded. "I did. But that doesn't mean I would choose to go through it again or wish it on anyone else. Especially not my son." By the late 1970s, my book had found a wider audience. A small publishing house in New York picked it up, gave it a new cover and a modest marketing campaign. Reviews were mixed, some dismissing it as delusion or fabrication, others hailing it as an important contribution to our understanding of consciousness and mortality. I began receiving invitations to speak at conferences on near-death experiences, to participate in studies at universities, to appear on radio and television programs. I accepted some, declined others. I had no interest in fame or in becoming a guru-like figure. I simply wanted to share what I had learned, to help others understand what I had come to understand. In 1982, our first grandchild was born, Elizabeth's son, whom they named James after me. Holding him in the hospital just hours after his birth, I was overwhelmed by a sense of continuity, of lives flowing into one another across time. Was this the grandson Tommy had shown me? I didn't know yet, but I felt the same sense of purpose, of meaning that had guided me since Korea. 4 years later, Michael and his wife had a son of their own, Thomas, named for the friend I had lost all those years ago. When I held him for the first time, I whispered in his tiny ear, "Your namesake is watching over you. He's part of why you're here." Life settled into a pattern. I retired from the hardware store but continued to write and speak about my experiences. Sarah and I traveled when we could, visited our grandchildren often, lived the quiet, content life of a couple who had weathered many storms together and emerged stronger for it. Then in 1991, as America once again sent troops to war, this time in the Persian Gulf, I received a phone call that brought Tommy's prophecy rushing back to me. "Dad?" Michael's voice was tight with worry. "Thomas has enlisted in the Marines. He ships out for boot camp next month." My grandson was only 18, just graduated from high school. Like his father before him, He had grown up hearing my story. But unlike Michael, Thomas had developed a deep fascination with military service. The thought of his following that path filled me with both pride and terror. Have you tried to talk him out of it? I asked. Of course, Michael said. But you know Thomas. Once he makes up his mind, I did know. My grandson had inherited my stubbornness, among other traits. Let me talk to him, I said. Thomas came to visit the following weekend. He was already carrying himself differently, straighter, more deliberate in his movements, preparing in his mind for the discipline of military life. Grandpa, he greeted me with a firm handshake that turned into a hug. Dad said you wanted to see me. We sat on the porch drinking lemonade that Sarah had made before tactfully finding reasons to leave us alone. For a while, we just talked about ordinary things. His summer job, his girlfriend, the car he was saving up to buy. Finally, I asked, why the Marines, Thomas? He didn't pretend to misunderstand. Because they're the best, he said simply. Because I want to make a difference, to be part of something bigger than myself. There are many ways to do that, I pointed out. Thomas nodded. I know, but this is the way I've chosen. He looked at me directly, his eyes so like his father's, like mine. I thought you, of all people, would understand. I do understand, I said slowly. That's what worries me. I know what war is, Thomas. What it does to you, what it takes from you. You also know what it gave you, he countered. Your experience in Korea, it shaped your entire life afterward. Would you really undo that if you could? The question caught me off guard. Would I? If I could go back and avoid that mortar round, avoid dying on that frozen hillside, avoid seeing what I saw, would I? No, I admitted finally. I wouldn't. But that doesn't mean I want you to face what I faced. I'm not asking for that, Thomas said. I'm just asking for your blessing, for you to trust that I'm making the right choice for me. I looked at my grandson, so young, so earnest, so determined. I saw in him the same qualities I had seen in Tommy Fitzgerald all those years ago. The same courage, the same conviction. And I knew I couldn't stand in his way. You have my blessing, I said, and my prayers that you'll never have to see combat the way I did. Thomas left for boot camp in September 1991. He wrote regularly, letters full of the challenges and triumphs of Marine training. He graduated near the top of his class and was assigned to an infantry unit based at Camp Pendleton in California. For the next few years, he served without seeing combat. The Gulf War ended quickly, and while there were smaller conflicts and peacekeeping missions, Thomas was not deployed to any of them. I began to hope that he might complete his service without facing the horrors of war. Then came September 11, 2001. Like most Americans, I watched in stunned horror as the towers fell. Like most Americans, I felt the surge of grief, anger, and fear that followed. And like most Americans with loved ones in the military, I knew what was coming next. Thomas's unit was among the first deployed to Afghanistan. He called the night before they shipped out. I wanted to talk to you, Grandpa, he said, his voice crackling over the poor connection. Before we head over. I'm glad you did, I told him, fighting to keep my voice steady. I've been thinking a lot about your book, he said, about what you experienced in Korea. Oh, yeah, it helps, you know, knowing that even if the worst happens. He trailed off. Thomas, I said firmly, you listen to me. You're coming home. Do you understand? You focus on your training, on keeping yourself and your fellow Marines alive. Leave the rest to God or the universe or whatever you want to call it. He laughed, a sound that reminded me how young he still was. Yes, sir, he said. I'll do my best. The months that followed were among the most difficult of my life. Every news report from Afghanistan sent a spike of fear through me. Every ringing phone made my heart race. Sarah and I prayed nightly for Thomas's safety, for the safety of all those serving. He came home in April 2002, physically unharmed, but changed in ways that were immediately apparent to those who knew him best. The easy laughter was gone. His eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before. He flinched at loud noises and scanned crowded rooms as if looking for threats. When I asked him about his experiences, he gave brief, sanitized answers. It was okay, Grandpa. We did what we had to do. I'm just glad to be home. But I recognized the signs. I had seen them in the mirror for years after Korea. I had seen them in countless veterans I'd spoken with over the decades. Thomas was carrying wounds that wouldn't show up on any medical scan. He returned to Afghanistan for a second tour in late 2002, then was deployed to Iraq when that war began in 2003. Each deployment seemed to take more from him, to hollow him out in ways that became increasingly difficult to ignore. By the time he completed his service and returned to civilian life in 2005, the vibrant, idealistic young man who had sought my blessing was gone. In his place was someone harder, more distant, haunted by things he refused to discuss. He moved back to his parents' town but got his own apartment. Found work as a security consultant for a tech company. Dated occasionally but never seemed to form lasting relationships. He visited family dutifully on holidays and birthdays, but rarely stayed long. "I'm worried about him, Dad," Michael told me after one such visit. "He's drinking too much. Having nightmares. Leslie next door says she hears him shouting in his sleep sometimes." I nodded, the concern I'd been feeling for years crystallizing into certainty. "I'll talk to him." "He won't talk about it," Michael said. "We've tried. His mother's tried. Even his old Marine buddies have tried." "He'll talk to me," I said with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. I called Thomas the next day, invited him to come stay with us for a weekend. "Your grandmother misses you," I said, using Sarah as gentle leverage. "And I could use some help with a few projects around the house." To my relief, he agreed. When he arrived that Friday evening, the changes in him were even more apparent than I'd realized. He had lost weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, which moved restlessly, never quite settling on any one thing. His smile when he greeted us seemed forced, a mask he put on for our benefit. We had dinner, Sarah's pot roast that had always been his favorite. He ate little, pushed the food around his plate more than anything. The conversation was strained, full of awkward pauses and careful avoidance of certain topics. After Sarah went to bed, claiming tiredness, though I knew she was giving us space, Thomas and I sat in the living room. He nursed a beer, his fourth since arriving, while I sipped decaf coffee. "Your dad's worried about you," I said finally. "We all are." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I'm fine." "No." "You're not." I set my coffee down, leaned forward. "And you don't have to pretend to be." "Not with me." He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time since arriving. Something in his eyes, pain, fear, a silent plea for help, nearly broke my heart. "I can't talk about it," he said quietly. "You can't keep carrying it alone either," I replied. "Believe me, I know." The silence stretched between us, heavy with all the things unsaid. Then almost imperceptibly, something in Thomas's posture changed. A slight relaxation, as if he had made a decision. "Did you ever?" he began, then stopped. Took another swallow of beer. "Did you ever have to kill someone up close? Close enough to see their eyes?" The question hit me like a physical blow. In all my speaking and writing about Korea, I had largely glossed over the violence I had both witnessed and participated in. I had focused on my death, on what came after, on the message I brought back. But the reality of war, the brutal, intimate reality of taking another human life, that I had kept mostly to myself. "Yes," I said simply, "in Korea, and it stayed with me." Thomas nodded, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. "There was this house in Fallujah," he said, his voice detached, as if he were describing a movie he'd seen rather than something he'd lived through. "We had intel that insurgents were using it as a command post. My squad was sent to clear it." He described entering the house room by room, the tension of not knowing what waited around each corner. The sounds, the smells, the oppressive heat, and then, in what appeared to be a child's bedroom, a man with an AK-47. "He was young," Thomas said, "maybe 20. I came through the door and he was right there, raising his weapon. I fired first. 3 rounds center mass, just like we were trained." His voice faltered slightly. He looked surprised, like he couldn't believe what was happening. He said something in Arabic. I don't know what. Then he was gone. I reached out, put my hand on his shoulder. He flinched but didn't pull away. "That's not the worst part," he continued after a moment. "After we secured the house, we found photos. He had a family, a wife, a little girl about 3 years old. And I just keep thinking, was he really an insurgent? Or just a guy protecting his home? His family? What would I have done in his place?" The questions tumbled out of him then. Questions that had clearly been tormenting him for years. Questions about the righteousness of the war, about his role in it, about the lives he had taken and the lives he had failed to save. Questions about how to live with the things he had seen and done. I listened. For hours I just listened as my grandson emptied himself of the poison he'd been carrying. I didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. I didn't tell him that time would heal these wounds, or that he had only done his duty. I simply witnessed his pain, his guilt, his confusion, as someone had once witnessed mine. When he finally fell silent, exhausted by his own outpouring, I told him about Tommy. Not the Tommy from my near-death experience, but the real Tommy Fitzgerald who had died beside me in Korea. I told Thomas things I had never put in my book. The fear in Tommy's eyes as he realized he was dying. The way his hand had gripped mine with surprising strength. The promise I had made to deliver his letter. I carried the guilt of his death for years, I said. Wondered why he had died and I had lived. What made me special? What gave me the right to have a future when he didn't? Thomas was watching me intently now, his eyes clearer than they had been all evening. What changed? He asked. I realized that the question itself was wrong, I said. It wasn't about deserving or not deserving. It wasn't about rights or fairness. Life just is. Death just is. What matters is what we do with the time we have, however much or little that might be. I told him then about the message I had brought back, not in the carefully crafted language I had developed over decades of speaking and writing, but in raw, simple terms, about the interconnection of all things, about the continuation of consciousness beyond physical death, about the fundamental reality of love as the organizing principle of the universe. The man you killed in Fallujah, I said gently, he's not gone. Not really. Transformed, yes. In a different state of being, yes. But not gone. And neither are you. Not the you that existed before the war, before those experiences changed you. That Thomas is still there, still part of you, just as the man in Fallujah is still part of the greater whole. Thomas looked skeptical, but he was listening. I'm not saying this to minimize what you're going through, I continued, or to suggest that these realizations will magically heal your pain. They won't. The healing comes from integration, from finding a way to hold both the light and the dark, the beauty and the horror, as parts of a whole, from finding meaning not despite your experiences, but through them. And have you, he asked, found that integration? I smiled slightly. Some days better than others. It's a process, not a destination. We talked until dawn began to lighten the sky outside. Thomas didn't transform overnight. There was no sudden unburdening, no miraculous healing. But something had shifted, some first step taken on a long journey toward wholeness. Before he left that Sunday, he hugged me tightly, something he hadn't done in years. Thank you, Grandpa, he said, for not bullshitting me, for not trying to fix me. You don't need fixing, I told him. You need understanding, and you're not alone in needing it. In the months that followed, Thomas began attending a support group for combat veterans. He cut back on his drinking, started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma, called his parents more often. Small steps, but significant ones. And he began asking me more about my experience. Not just the near-death part, but all of it. What Korea had been like. How I had coped in the years afterward. What had helped, what hadn't. Real questions from someone genuinely trying to understand his own journey through the lens of mine. One evening, about a year after our late-night conversation, he called me with an idea. I've been thinking, Grandpa, he said, his voice more animated than I'd heard it in years. Your book, it helped me. And I know it's helped a lot of other people too. But there's a whole generation of veterans now who might never pick it up, might never hear your story. What are you suggesting? I asked, though I had a feeling I knew where he was going. A video series, he said. Simple, just you talking about your experience. We could put it online, make it accessible to anyone who needs it. I hesitated. At 94, I was slowing down considerably. The thought of starting a new project, especially one involving technology I barely understood, was daunting. I'd handle all the technical stuff. Thomas added quickly, sensing my reluctance. All you'd have to do is tell your story. The same story you've been telling for 70 years. There was such hope in his voice, such purpose, that I found myself agreeing despite my reservations. We started filming the following month. Just Thomas, me, and a camera in my living room. He had researched how to do it properly. Lighting, sound, all the technical aspects I knew nothing about. But the heart of it was simple. I would tell my story again, from the beginning. I suppose I should start by introducing myself. I began on that first day of filming. My name is James Conner. I served as a sergeant in the United States Army, 2nd Infantry Division, during the Korean War. What I'm about to tell you isn't easy for me. I've spent over 70 years trying to make sense of it. We filmed over several sessions, breaking the story into parts. Thomas edited the footage, added simple titles and transitions, created a YouTube channel he called I Died in Combat, and came back with a message. He showed me the finished product before posting it, wanting my approval. Watching myself on screen was strange. This elderly man with wispy white hair and liver-spotted hands, telling a story about a young soldier who died on a frozen hillside in Korea. There seemed such distance between those two versions of myself, and yet they were connected by an unbroken thread of experience and meaning. "It's good," I told Thomas. "Post it." He did with modest expectations. Maybe a few hundred views, he thought. Something that might help a handful of veterans struggling with their own mortality, their own trauma, their own questions about what it all means. What happened next took us both by surprise. The videos began to spread, first among veterans groups, then more broadly. Comments poured in from people sharing their own experiences of near death, of combat, of loss and transformation. Email inquiries came from researchers, journalists, documentary filmmakers. A television producer called, wanting to develop the story into a series. Thomas fielded it all, protecting me from the overwhelming aspects while sharing the encouraging responses. "People are connecting with your story, Grandpa," he told me. "Just like I did. They're finding hope in it." And Thomas himself was transforming through the process. Working on the videos gave him purpose, a way to process his own experiences by helping others process theirs. The haunted look in his eyes began to fade, replaced by something that looked remarkably like peace. In the spring of 2020, as a pandemic swept the globe and forced people into isolation, our videos found an even larger audience. In a time of widespread fear and uncertainty about death, my 70-year-old experience suddenly felt urgently relevant to many. "It's like Tommy told you," Thomas said to me after we'd recorded what would turn out to be our final session. "The message you brought back wasn't just for you or for your family. It was for anyone who needed to hear it." I nodded, too moved to speak. The circle felt complete somehow. From Tommy Fitzgerald showing me the grandson who would need my understanding, to that grandson now helping me share that understanding with the world. My health began failing that summer. Nothing dramatic, just the accumulated wearing down of 94 years of life. Sarah had passed 5 years earlier, and I felt the absence of her more keenly with each passing day. Some mornings I would wake and for a moment forget that she was gone, reach for her across the empty space in the bed. The disappointment of remembering never lessened. Thomas moved in with me in August, taking a leave of absence from his job to become my caretaker. We fell into a comfortable routine. Breakfast together on the porch when the weather allowed, readings and discussions of the books and articles people sent in response to our videos, occasional visits from family and friends. One evening in late September, as the first hints of autumn colored the trees in our yard, I felt a familiar presence, one I hadn't sensed in many years. Tommy standing just beyond the veil of ordinary perception, watching, waiting. I knew then that my time was growing short. I felt no fear, only a quiet anticipation, like preparing for a long-awaited journey. That night, Thomas and I sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "Do you remember?" I asked him. "The message I told you I brought back? About what matters most?" He nodded. "That we're all connected. That consciousness continues. That love is the fundamental reality." "Yes," I said, "but there's one more part I've never fully articulated, not in all my speaking or writing or videos." Thomas turned to look at me, curious. "It's about forgiveness," I said. "Not just forgiving others, though that's important, but forgiving ourselves. For surviving when others didn't, for the harm we've caused, intentionally or not, for being imperfect, limited beings trying to make sense of an unlimited reality." I reached out, took his hand. "You asked me once if I had found integration, a way to hold both the light and the dark as parts of a whole. The key to that integration is forgiveness. Not forgetting, not excusing, but releasing the grip that guilt and shame have on our capacity to fully experience life." Thomas's eyes glistened in the fading light. "Is that what you're doing now? Offering me forgiveness?" I shook my head. "No, I'm reminding you that forgiveness is already there, waiting for you to claim it. It's part of the light Tommy showed me, part of the reality that exists beyond what we can see or touch or measure. You don't need me or anyone else to bestow it. You just need to recognize that it's already yours." We sat in silence for a while after that, hand in hand, watching the night deepen around us. I felt a profound peace, a readiness I had been moving toward for 7 decades. 3 days later, I had a stroke. The paramedics came, took me to the hospital. The doctors did what they could, but the damage was extensive. I drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of family gathering, of Thomas always at my bedside, of whispered conversations and tears, In my moments of clarity, I felt no fear, no resistance, only a growing sense of completion. The circle was closing. The promise I had made to Tommy all those years ago had been fulfilled. The message had been delivered. Whatever came next, I was ready. On the third night, I opened my eyes to find Thomas dozing in the chair beside my bed. The hospital room was dim, just the soft glow of monitoring equipment providing light. Outside the window, the night sky was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. I felt it then, the beginning of the transition. Not painful, not frightening, just a gradual loosening of the ties binding me to my worn-out body. A release, a letting go. "Thomas," I whispered. He woke immediately, leaned forward. "I'm here, Grandpa." I summoned my remaining strength, reached for his hand. "I wanted to tell you, I'm going to see Tommy now, and your grandmother." "It's all right." Tears filled his eyes, but he nodded. "I know. Remember what I told you," I said, my voice fading. "About forgiveness. About love being the fundamental reality." "I will," he promised. "We all will. Your message will live on." I smiled at that. Not my message. Never was. Just one I was asked to carry for a while. Now it's yours. I felt the room growing distant, my awareness expanding beyond its walls. The light was there again, just as I remembered it. More real, more vibrant, more alive than anything in the material world. And within it, waiting for me, were the presences I had glimpsed 70 years before. Tommy was there, and Sarah and others I had known and lost along the way. My last human sight was Thomas's face, tears streaming down his cheeks but a smile breaking through, as if he could sense what I was seeing. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "So beautiful." Then I was moving toward the light, toward home, still carrying with me the love of those I was leaving behind, but knowing now with absolute certainty that separation is an illusion, that all lives, all loves, all moments exist together in a wholeness beyond our limited perception, that we are never truly gone, that nothing that matters is ever lost, that in the end only love remains.